Thank you, David. I think you guys can hear me, right? So, as David was mentioning, I'm an accidental academic. I've spent all of my career in the tech industry, running businesses in this kind of intersection of technology and the consumer. I feel it's very liberating that today I'm not representing any vendors. I'm not representing any of the startups that I invest in, and it's just like my opinion about the topic. What I was planning to do is three things today. First is talk a little bit about how we got here to a moment in which our government announced winning the race AI plan, then what this plan is, and then reflect a little bit about the kind of implications for the industry and how you could think about this. Does that make sense? So, and I was kind of reflecting a little bit about kind of the interaction with us in the audience during the last panel. And the first question, which was, how many of us would be either Googling for something or asking this question to an AI? And then the question about agents at the end. And if this thing has not hit you yet, combine the two conversations. And if it's something between 75 to 95% of us would be asking for a question to an AI agent. And if something like what OpenAI announced yesterday, which is instant checkout, which is now the option for you to go and execute a transaction after having received that answer, I think this has clear implications to what we're all dealing with. And it could be as massive as we have seen with the transition to the internet and e-commerce and et cetera, right? So this would lead us to kind of this conversation about how we got here. It's a very abbreviated history of a phenomena that I think has been with us for 70 years. So we all talk as if like AI is something very new. Yes, generative AI, kind of a hit the popular zeitgeist probably in November 2022 when OpenAI announced ChatGPT. But it's been around with us since, I would say, 1949. In 1949 is when Alan Turing wrote like a seminal paper that was called Can Machines Think? And created what then became a movie title called The Imitation Game, which is basically what we know today as the Turing test, right? Which is figure out if you can identify whether you're talking to a machine or some form of intelligence or to a human. So as a science, it's been with us for more than 70 years. And the term artificial intelligence was coined for the first time in 1956, so almost exactly 70 years from today, when a group of researchers, there was actually even one from IBM, decided that they wanted to spend the summer in Dartmouth and solve all problems related to machine intelligence, and they called that artificial intelligence. I think they would have been a little bit ambitious. So keep this in mind, that kind of the science has been around with us for multiple decades. And we are living through an exponential acceleration now. This exponential acceleration has been driven by data availability. A lot of this data we generate, from what we dress, the phones that we carry, et cetera, and also an exponential decline in the costs of both storage for that data and the compute power. So when we put 70 years of algorithmic science and the mathematics that have created this with cost of computing converging to zero in an infinite amount of data, that's what gives us the generative AI that we have today. So in terms of how we approach this in the United States, traditionally, as with many things related to technology, we have had a somewhat laissez-faire approach to it, in which we kind of let the technology evolve and then figure out if it generates problems and then try and deal with those problems. I think the massive impact that AI is having and will continue to have could lead us to potentially question if this is the best approach. In other places around the world, people have very different ways to manage this, notably in the European Union, and I think this is important for many of you who are global companies and operate either with guests or have properties around the world. It's a much more regulatory environment. And, but in the last maybe 2 to 3 years, we've been on a journey here in terms of legislating on the topic via executive orders and not legislating through the Congress. This, on one hand, is kind of a good thing because it's a little bit more dynamic and allows us to change as the technology evolves. On the other hand, it's very subject to changes, right? And from administration to administration, we can have changes in 180 80 degrees on how we're dealing with this policy. And this is what happened in this space. During the Biden administration, and I think it was October 2023, so 10 months, almost 11 months after ChatGPT, Biden announced, or the administration announced, an executive order whose focus was in safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. Fast forward to January of this year, and the days before, actually the Thursday and Friday before inauguration, which was on a Monday, they announced two more executive orders. One which was for allowing for faster build-out of data centers, and also the revamping of the electricity infrastructure for both generation and distribution in the country to feed those data centers, and a second executive order for what they call the AI diffusion, which was basically around export controls, especially for high-end GPUs to a range of countries, but notably driving restrictions to China and kind of the six restricted countries. And again, this on Thursday and Friday before inauguration on Monday. Comes the new administration on Monday. On Monday, they revoke Biden's executive order. They do not touch the two, the diffusion and the data center acceleration one. And as they do this, just a few days after that, they also commission an RFI for asking for information from the public in general on what a policy for AI could be for the country. And by the way, I forgot mentioning, in this act or executive order revoking the Biden executive order, they also asked for, in 180 days, for an action plan. So the 180 days clock went until July 23rd, when the Trump AI action plan has been signed. So they went about it kind of the right way. They asked the public, they asked all of us what should be done in the plan, and they received 10,068 comments, right? 10,068 answers, and I'll come back to that and kind of an analysis that we have done to that. Then things have started to change a little bit in terms of especially the diffusion framework. Even though both administrations have significant concerns with national security, we've seen that the current administration started to become much more transactional in what relates to the topic. They revoked the diffusion framework and started to sign kind of bilateral agreements. There was a trip to the United Emirates in which there's a series of investments that have been committed as part of that trip. In order to, part of those investments were to purchase a lot of this high technology, and specifically NVIDIA chips. In order to do that, they had to revoke the diffusion framework and come with something that replaced that. And you probably have seen the movie in terms of either bilateral country-to-country agreements, or the charging 15% of NVIDIA's and AMD's revenues whenever they sell to China, and the 10% investment on Intel. So a radically different perspective on how to do this. And then eventually, after exactly the 180 days, on July 23rd, on event here in DC, hosted by the All In podcast, which is Dave Sachs' podcast, which is a venture capitalist, and the AI czar in the administration, they announced the winning the race AI action plan, and we'll talk a little bit more in details about this. But I mentioned this RFI, right? And the fact that they received 10,068 answers. And I thought this was like a unique time capsule of public opinion in terms of what is AI for the consumers, the guests, the industry in the United States in the first half of 2025. So with a small group of my research assistant and students, we decided to use AI to analyze those 10,000 answers. And we kind of reached a series of conclusions. If you want to look at the data sets and the kind of the detailed things, there's a paper that we've written with that. The data is public. And, but what was very interesting is there was a significant gap between what the industry was looking at and what civil society was looking at. And 78% of what we classified as civil society were looking to prioritize responsible AI development and the public interest, and 75% of the industry, on the other hand, were focusing on acceleration and national security. So polar opposite opinions. And keep this in mind, especially because we all serve guests, we all serve consumers, which are some of these humans in the civil society that were answering this. So comes July 23rd, the administration announces the AI action plan that has three main kind of pillars. The first is acceleration and innovation and total deregulation. The second one is the diffusion, but without using the word diffusion, of what they called an American AI stack. So making sure that, and by the way, I completely agree with them from this perspective, that what we will win this race, if we want to classify this as a kind of a geopolitical race, is whoever nation that has its technology adopted by the rest of the world. It's kind of notorious that as a country we've lost in telecommunications, the 5G for China. So if you look around the world, with the exception of the US, telecommunications is powered by Chinese technology. So this emphasis on adoption of an American AI stack is an important one. We can debate how we're going to go about it. In addition to that, a focus and an enforcement later on with a specific companion executive order on unbiased AI, which they termed woke AI, making sure that there is a prohibition of usage of woke AI by any federal agencies. And in the middle of this, there was an encouragement also for usage of open source AI and upskilling. We had a lot of discussions here in terms of culture, but also skills within organizations. I think it's interesting to kind of understand what is coming from the government in terms of initiatives for upskilling. There have been two types of those upskilling initiatives. One have been very focused on the trades, so things like electricians or HVAC technicians in support of the data center build-out that is necessarily to power AI. But there's also a lot of focus on upskilling society at large, not only through K-12 programs, but also upskilling within companies. And that's kind of a plug also that I want to leave in terms of actions that you could be taking. It's kind of understanding what is in the legislation that would allow you to maybe create partnerships with local governments, state governments, or even the labor department to go and run upskilling programs within your organizations. I mentioned in addition to kind of the big AI action plan announcement, there were three executive orders. I'll leave their names here if you're curious, that create the pillars for execution. The one around government procurement, another one around data center and construction and energy infrastructure, and the third one about this diffusion of the American AI staff. And then recently now, in September, well, we're still in September, so this month, the Commerce Committee in Senate, and it's the committee that's shared by Ted Cruz, has announced what he called a light touch framework for regulating AI, which you could also read it as a framework for deregulating AI, and submitted the first bill for the creation of sandboxes, which would be spaces in which you could experiment with AI without having to be subject to any form of liability, right? So I'd say that the way I would look at our current policies, right, would be around what is in the AI Action Plan. There's a lot of activity in Congress, but there is a framework that is, underpins this, the winning AI race, and then a ton of activity at the state level. At the state level, we have more than 1,000 bills in different states trying to regulate usage of AI from many different perspectives. And the counter point to that is an attempt at federal preemption. Some of this is, they've tried first an AI moratorium so that we wouldn't have any AI laws for 10 years, which, as you can imagine, in a world that we live in today, 10 years is like a future that we can't even imagine. That failed, and some of this light touch framework also has elements of preemption. So still a lot of this is in flux. So as I reflect about this, what could be the implications for the industry here? So first, there is this massive push towards deregulation and acceleration. As businesses, I think we need to weigh that against reputational risk, right, of how we're dealing with guest data, personal data, and create the right set of policies, companies' policies that will, on one hand, foment this acceleration, but at the same time, make sure that you balance this with ethics and reputational risk management. I think the competitive landscape will be transformed. We've seen just today several examples of companies that are starting in this space. This will accelerate. There's a lot of incentives for more investments. The startups are unleashed with this deregulatory push. So they will come very aggressively, as they should, incumbents. And so if you're an incumbent either in the physical world or in the online world, you need to kind of be ready for this. During the day today, we also talked about whether the hospitality industry, whether you're leading or lagging in terms of adoption. I was trying to get some market data relative to this before coming, and the most recent that I found was this from July of this year, and it's relative to generative AI specifically. And even if you can debate kind of the numbers themselves, but they show the trend. So even though more than 70% of the interviewed companies acknowledge that they have already experimented with AI, there's only a 24% level of real adoption in the industry. And if you compare this to finance, that I think is at 50%, and retail at 42%, it confirms what has been discussed here, that this industry tends to be a lagging industry. So I see in this kind of both a problem as well as an opportunity, because if you believe that this will fundamentally change from guest experience to all the way to the way you can manage revenue management or change the bottom line, it's a good time to jump in now. So I would strongly recommend that you accelerate investments in this area. The moment and the regulatory environment is very conducive to that. If you are one of the startups represented here, this is a good time to experiment in how you use data. Take a look at what is if the Sandbox Act is going to go forward or not. If it goes, you probably want to volunteer to operate within one of those sandboxes, because then you will be able to be more aggressive. I kind of left a plug for upskilling and reskilling. There is another one executive order, and again, I left the number here for your reference, from April of this year, that has a focus on apprenticeships. And within this executive order, there's a Section 8 specifically, which directs the Labor Department to go and establish partnerships with the private industry for this. So the very specific thought here is, how could you establish one of those partnerships, and then maybe even defray some of the costs that you have in terms of reskilling your workforce. And as you do this, even though we're in a very deregulatory environment from a federal perspective, internationally, that's not the case, right? If you're operating in Europe, it's a very different environment there. And also, there's a lot of activity at the state level. Keep an eye on it. There is activity, very active. There are 2 bills in front of Gavin Newsom in California now, so things may start to change unless there is federal preemption. And then kind of the last thing that I wanted to mention, it's we had a discussion about the famous or infamous MIT article about 95% of the projects without an ROI. I happen to know them personally, right? The individuals that are just down the river from me now, that did they're from the Nanda group in the Media Lab. And I agree with the comment that was made that, well, 2 comments that were made. The study is poorly structured, but the second one, that the headline, which they have not chosen, was clickbait. Because the whole objective of what they have done was not to focus on the 95% that didn't work, but on the 5% that had worked. And they elaborate on the 3 things that one should do in order to get the return for the investment. So if you have the time or interest in looking at that research, look at it, but from a positive perspective, not the way it's been used from a negative perspective. And one of the things that also resonates a lot with my experience when I was serving you, when I was at IBM, is one of their recommendations, and the last point that I put there, which is the success or the return is when you integrate this with the business processes. So there was a lot of discussion here in terms of how you can reinvent, and absolutely you should reinvent some of the guest experience, the revenue management, and some of your business processes. But there's a lot of opportunity for integrating this with your existing processes, and that's where you're going to get the return for the investment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo.